Imagine waking up every hour to the sting of fleas burrowing into your skin, gasping for air in a suffocating haze of your own sweat, and doing so in a chamber that took 5 years to build. This was not a torture chamber or a prison cell. It was the private bedroom of a high-ranking Egyptian priest. Right now, as you lean back in your chair, the ground beneath you may rest upon the bones of those who convulsed through feverish nightmares in the same unforgiving heat. The dust that brushes around your feet once danced through temple corridors, carrying whispers of prayers and cries of delirium. What if I told you that in one of history's most advanced civilizations, renowned for monumental architecture and intellectual achievements, peaceful sleep was a luxury they could scarcely afford? That the very act of closing your eyes risked encountering horrors more vivid than any waking nightmare? Over the next few minutes, we'll uncover why ancient Egyptians rarely enjoyed uninterrupted rest, and explore how their ceaseless nights influence the course of history itself. Because how we sleep shapes how we think, how we love, how we wage war, how we betray, and ultimately, how we die. You won't hear this tale in guidebooks or chiseled in stone. Instead, you'll glimpse it between the cracks of sun-baked mud bricks and hidden within the fervent chants of temple rituals. A paradox. The more they perfected astronomy, medicine, and governance, the less they could indulge in the simplest human need: sleep. Why did the very rulers who commanded the Nile's ebb and flow fear the dark hours more than any external enemy? That question will drive us deeper into the labyrinth of their beliefs and their bodies' breaking points. Notice the puzzle pieces already emerging. A civilization that counted stars yet shivered under the vast night sky. Priests who meticulously recorded dreams but lived in dread of them. Common laborers who toiled through the cool hours, swapping rest for productivity in a desperate bid for relief. We'll return to the why and how soon enough. But first, hold on to that unsettling image of a man. Or perhaps it could have been you, tossing and turning under a stone roof, trapped between the heat of day and the terrors of night. And remember, every unanswered question is a promise of revelation. Soon, the secrets of those sleepless nights will come to light. Are you ready to wake up to a history you thought you knew? The moment the sun dipped behind the limestone pylons, relief did not follow. Only a slight drop of 2 or 3 degrees in temperature, barely enough to loosen the grip of the desert heat. 17-year-old Tahar slid from the narrow doorway of his family's cramped mud brick home and collapsed against the cool stone wall of the temple courtyard. Even here, every surface still radiated the day's scorching fire back at him. His skin felt slick, as though he wore a second layer of oil. It wasn't oil, though. It was sweat, thick and salty, running down his neck and stinging his eyes. In the gloom of early night, each bead of moisture glimmered like a tiny jewel, and each carried a promise of more suffering. He dared not wipe his brow. The rags he wore were already infested with lice, and his shoulders itched with the bite of fleas. At home, the air was so stagnant that even the faintest breeze through the narrow windows sent dust motes dancing in golden shafts of torchlight. Here, at least, the open sky offered a scant breath of air. He shivered, not from cold, but from a creeping sense of dread. Every creak of the temple door sounded like a warning. He closed his eyes, hoping to snatch a moment's rest, only to be assaulted by the buzzing of insects. He felt them crawling, tiny legs tickling his neck, biting at his scalp. He shook his head violently, dislodging a cloud of parasites. Each movement sent fresh jolts of irritation coursing through his bones. Behind him, the wails of a dying child pierced the night. Tahar shifted, peering into the darkness, where a faint glow revealed the twisted form of a snake-stricken youngster. The boy's skin was mottled, dark scars where venom seared through flesh. He mumbled prayers to the gods, but the courtyard's priests remained indifferent, preoccupied with midnight rituals that Tahar could not yet decipher. He pressed his palms against the wall. Its surface was cool to the touch, flecks of stone embedded in hardened mud. He leaned his cheek against it, hoping the contact would lull him into unconsciousness, but each exhale brought the fetid stench of spoiled grains and rotting dates from the granary next door, a warm undertone of rancid oil from the workshop at the far end, and the unmistakable pungent presence of human waste from the alley behind his family's house. Even at night, these odors hung heavy like a cloak, impossible to remove. He tried to focus on his breathing, in through the nose, out through the mouth, but the heat made each breath shallow, rapid. His chest tightened, as if a heavy weight pressed upon it. The sickly sweetness of last night's spoiled bread lingered at the back of his throat, a grim reminder that his stomach could no longer distinguish nourishment from poison. At supper, he had felt the first cramps, violent knots that twisted his gut until sweat beaded on his forehead. He had forced down a piece of bread, soaked in diluted beer, convinced it was thirst that plagued him. Instead, his insides churned and threatened to spill out before he could reach the courtyard wall. The night deepened, and the million stars above offered no comfort. They seemed to mock him, dots of cold light set against the vast emptiness. He thought of his mother's gentle voice, telling him stories of the afterlife, of Osiris's calm realm beyond the Nile. But here, in this suffocating heat, the promise of sweet rest in death felt more achievable than sleep in life. He dozed for a heartbeat, drifted into darkness. Then, with a sudden snap, he was awake again, heart hammering. A distant dog barked, setting off a chain reaction of creaks and groans throughout the temple. Every echo magnified in the stillness, turning walls and roof into living things. The torches flickered, casting elongated shadows that crawled across the ground like hungry beasts. Tahar sat up, chest heaving. The sweat on his face glistened in the torchlight, salt-stinging open cuts left by restless scratching. His arms trembled from exhaustion. Yet he could not rest. Not when every second invited another torment. The snap of a twig underfoot, the hiss of a scorpion fleeing from the heat, the low moan of a laborer who moaned in delirium just beyond the inner wall. Each sound was a drumbeat reminding him that his body was fraying, thread by weary thread. He forced himself to his feet, swaying like a reed in the wind. A half-empty water jar stood near the altar. He raised it to his lips, but the water was lukewarm and dusty. He forced a swallow, gagging at the grit. Better to stay thirsty than risk a mouthful of sand. 2 torches' glow pointed toward the temple ministers performing their nocturnal rites. Tahar watched as they chanted, swinging censers that left trails of pungent incense smoke. It curled and twisted, hissing as it met the humid air. The smell should have been calming, but to a body on the brink, it was another layer of burning grease across already raw nerves. He cursed under his breath. This was his life. 5 days on end, without proper rest, without real food, without relief. Every nerve in his body felt exposed. His mind, once sharp and eager to learn the secrets of sacred texts, now drifted toward hallucinations. snatches of melody from his mother's lullabies blending with the high-pitched whine of insects. Reality blurred at the edges, and he wondered whether dawn would ever come. He sank back down, forehead against the stone once more. Just a moment, he whispered to himself. But the courtyard walls offered no mercy, no promise of peace. Here, in the cradle of one of history's greatest civilizations, the physiology of survival meant surrendering to a nightly battle against one's own body. And tonight, Tahar felt certain that his would be the next to break. When Tahar closed his eyes, he no longer dreamed of the Nile's quiet shimmer or the singing of the temple priests. Instead, visions of gods and the dead flooded his mind. Anubis, with jackal eyes that pierced his soul, the feather of Ma'at weighing his heart, and faces of ancestors who beckoned him into shadowy halls. Each night, the boundary between reality and nightmare thinned until it all seemed one and the same. He began to dread the moment his eyelids finally met. The first stirrings of sleep launched him into a landscape he could neither control nor escape. Once, he awoke drenched in sweat, convinced he had actually walked alongside Osiris through a forest of bones. Another night, he believed he heard his deceased brother's voice whispering his name from beneath the tombstones. Each time, his heart pounded so fiercely he feared it might burst free from his chest. Tahar's mother watched her son's transformation with growing concern. One dusk, as he returned from the temple courtyard, eyes haunted, shoulders hunched, she guided him to the cool shade of a palm-fronded pavilion. "My son," she murmured, "sleep is not mere rest. It is the gate to Duat, the realm of the dead." He stared at her, incredulous. "The gate to Duat," he repeated, tasting the words. "Then every time I close my eyes, I step into their world?" She nodded gravely. "Our people believe that dreams are journeys. Some travelers return with wisdom. Others do not return at all." For Tahar, that explanation brought no comfort, only deeper terror. If sleep was indeed a passage to the underworld, then every blink was a gamble. He began to linger by the brazier, keeping his eyes open until the embers turned cold. He forced himself to chant prayers of protection, reciting the spell of awakening to guard his soul. In the gray hours before dawn, he would slump against the temple's cool limestone, physically exhausted, yet unable to surrender to true rest. His body ached for it, but his mind recoiled. He wrestled with his own logic. Were these terrifying visions merely fevered dreams, fueled by exhaustion and filth? Or was the spiritual truth more profound, that the gods themselves reached through the veil of sleep to claim their due? A seed of resolve took root in his chest. If sleep spelled danger, perhaps voluntary wakefulness could be sanctified. That evening, he announced to his mother, "I will join the order of the sleepless. I will fast from sleep to purify my soul." She gasped. "No, Tahar. Abstaining from sleep is a sacred rite only in direst need. You are too young for such trials." But Tahar was already on his way to the temple's inner sanctum, where the senior priestess conducted the ritual of insomnia. Candles flickered around a carved altar bearing the Uraeus serpent, and incense choked the air with heavy smoke. He knelt before her, head bowed, and she placed a single lotus petal on his brow, a symbol of rebirth through consciousness. As the ceremony commenced, Tahar's fear transformed into a twisted kind of hope. Each whispered chant was a promise: strength in wakefulness, clarity in hardship, union with the divine without the risk of death. He clasped his hands, repeating the incantation: I shall not close my eyes nor wander in the fields of death. My spirit stays tethered to this world. My heart holds fast to life. When at last he left the chamber, the first sliver of moon had risen. His legs wobbled, but his mind felt sharper, drunk on the conviction that he had wrestled with the gods and emerged victorious. Over the next days, Tahar maintained near constant vigilance. He learned to anchor his awareness through physical discomfort. A bite from a thorn pressed into his palm, the chant of a prayer worn like armor, the rhythm of his own pulse. Each time a hallucination flickered at the edge of his vision, he shouted the goddess Bast's name and forced his thoughts back to the waking world. Yet, adaptation had its own price. In the quiet moments, when he brushed a hand against the smooth reed wall of his home, he felt an emptiness so profound it threatened to swallow him. The laughter of other children sounded hollow. Their dreams, which he could no longer share, seemed like taunts. Still, with each passing night, the terrors lessened in intensity. Whereas before he had shrieked at imagined figures reaching for him, now he simply opened his eyes and recited the protective spells. The visions, once vivid as living beings, faded to wisps, flickering silhouettes at the periphery of consciousness. The macro loop of his recurring dream image, the winged scarab beetle, puzzled him. Night after night, it scuttled across the sands of his visions, depositing a single golden sphere before him, then rolling it away into the darkness. What did it mean? He questioned every priest, every scroll he could find. Some said the scarab symbolized Khepri, the rising sun, bringing renewal. Others whispered that the sphere represented the human soul, carried through chaos to find rebirth. Tahar interpreted it as a message. If he could endure the trials of sleeplessness, he might emerge transformed, like the scarab emerging from the dung ball it carves, purer and stronger. His body, once ruled by fatigue, grew accustomed to cycles of forced alertness and brief micro-rest. He discovered that resting one hand on cool stone, eyes unfocused yet open, offered a momentary respite. He called these interludes shadow breaths. Though not true sleep, they were enough to stave off delirium. By the end of the second week, Tahar had become something of a legend among the scribes. They whispered of his uncanny calm in the face of exhaustion, of the soft glow in his eyes when others saw only red-rimmed veins. He walked through the temple corridors with measured steps, staff in hand, reciting the Book of the Dead to himself as both incantation and lullaby. Still, fear lingered. He knew that should he ever allow himself to slip fully into sleep, the visions would return with greater ferocity. And yet, he also understood that this self-imposed vigil could not last forever. The gods demanded balance. Too much wakefulness risked madness as surely as too much sleep risked death. In those rare moments when the moon dipped behind the clouds and the temple fell into near silence, Tahar would close his eyes for the briefest instant, just a heartbeat, and experience a single, perfect vision. Himself, older, teaching a new generation of scribes about the wisdom born of adversity. Then he would open his eyes, take a steadying breath, and whisper, "I awake in faith. I live in light." And so, Tahar's descent into ritual insomnia became not just a means to stave off terror, but a crucible for forging a new identity. No longer a frightened boy fleeing the shadows, but a seeker of truth who dared to challenge the boundaries between life and death, wakefulness and dream. By the third week of Tahar's vigil, the temple precinct had settled into a nocturnal rhythm alien to the rest of Memphis. Here, beneath the limestone pylons carved with hieroglyphs honoring Ra and Thoth, a vast web of social roles unfurled, governed as much by who slept as by who remained awake. Sacrifice of the senior scribe. Shortly after dusk one evening, Tahar arrived at the scriptorium, a vaulted chamber lit by flickering oil lamps. Scrolls lay strewn across a low wooden bench, ancient papyrus leaves in need of urgent copying. At its center sat Yuseb, the senior scribe, renowned for his mastery of magical texts. His robes were rumpled, dark circles framed his eyes. Still, he labored on. Yuseb gestured for Tahar to join him. The Ennead's passage incantation must be inscribed by dawn, he said in a gravelly whisper. Without it, tonight's ritual falters. Tahar hesitated, recognizing the gravity of the task. Copying a single line of such a text demanded precision and sleep. Yet Yuseb pressed a cup of sour beer into his hand and offered a crooked smile. Drink, boy. Fatigue loosens the hand of the master. As they worked, Tahar watched the senior scribe's hands twitch, the quill scratching unevenly across fragile fibers. When Tahar offered to trade places, Yuseb shook his head. My years are my burden now, he confessed. Let the youth rest that others may not. In that moment, Tahar realized the true cost of knowledge in this society, the sacrifice of slumber itself. Yuseb's willingness to forego rest ensured the preservation of sacred wisdom, but it also signified the fracturing bond between those who might live longer and those sentenced to sleepless nights. Laborers in the cool of night. Outside the temple's protective walls, fields of flax and grain waited for harvest. Under the pall of daytime heat, laborers were whipped into a stagnant sweat. Yet as the sun sank, they emerged again. Slaves, peasants, conscripted workers carrying baskets of sheaves and winnowing trays. Tahar paused by a makeshift threshing ground, where a line of tired men and women tossed stalks before the rising moon. Their breaths came in ragged gasps. Their clothes hung limp from exhaustion. He overheard one young man whisper to another, "At least the heat loosens its grip. Better to bleed here than be roasted alive." The other nodded, wiping sweat and perhaps tears from his brow. Every so often, one of the overseers would bark orders, driving the slaves harder. If someone faltered, a sharp crack from a palm stick reminded them of their station. Tahar felt a pang of guilt. In his self-imposed watchfulness, he was free to move, to serve the temple's needs. Here, these men and women labored not for spiritual ascendance, but for survival. Just before midnight, a hush descended. The overseers drank wine and dozed by their fires, believing the laborers now too weary for escape. Yet the fields still needed tending. The government's coffers depended on the year's yield. In the flicker of torchlight, Tahar saw eyes, sunken, haunted, but also flickers of defiance. One woman paused, turned her head, and met his gaze. For a moment, their shared exhaustion united them. Then she bent back to her task, resolute. The elites paid dreams. Within the temple's innermost sanctuary, the elite rested on raised stone platforms, arranged in concentric circles around the sacred bark of Amun. Carvings of lotus blossoms and sphinxes adorned the walls, and a gentle stream of cooled water ran beneath grated channels in the floor. Here, slumber was sold like any other privileged commodity. Wealthy patrons, high priests, military commanders, royal advisors, paid dream interpreters, professional visionaries who pried open their clients' minds and extracted prophetic images. For a heavy fee, one could purchase visions of triumph, divine favor, even communion with deceased pharaohs. Tahar passed through the outer courtyard to deliver a fresh scroll to one such patron, General Kemu. He found Kemu reclined on gilded pillows, his eyelids fluttering as a young dream seller traced patterns across his forehead with a lotus-petaled wand. The dream seller murmured incantations meant to stoke the imagination, coaxing the general toward victory on distant battlefields. Tahar's heart ached at the sight. Here was a man who denied himself the natural rest of an exhausted body, yet could buy miracles of sleep for selfish ends. Kemu's chest rose and fell in deliberate rhythm, his eyebrows arching in silent ecstasy. Soon, the dream seller withdrew, replaced by an attendant who recorded every syllable of General Kemu's utterances. As Tahar bowed and withdrew, he realized that in this hierarchy, the right to sleep, or at least the right to orchestrate one's dreams, had become a grotesque status symbol. Sleep, which should have been a universal relief, was transformed into currency. The flute player of the night market. Later, Tahar ventured to the night market just outside the temple gates. Under a canopy of papyrus mats, merchants sold dried fish, date wine, and game birds. A cluster of musicians gathered near a brazier, warming their fingers before performance. Amid them stood Nefret, a young woman in a cobalt blue linen dress. Her hair was bound with a simple reed band. Her dark eyes shone in the lamplight. She held a small, ivory flute, carved in the shape of a heron. As Tahar approached, she raised the instrument to her lips and coaxed a slow, haunting melody into the night air. The tune seemed to suspend time itself. Every note trembled with longing, whispering of lost repose. The laborers paused, pressing palms to their ears, basking in this rare offering. Even the guards relaxed, leaning against market stalls. Tahar found himself drawn forward until he stood at her feet. When she finished, the crowd exhaled in wonder. He crept closer and murmured, "Your music. It soothes the soul." Nefret smiled, but there was melancholy in her eyes. "I play because I cannot sleep," she confessed softly. "My father was a scribe who died copying forbidden scrolls. At night, I hear his voice in my dreams. I play to hold back the memories, so I won't lose myself in nightmares." Tahar recognized the courage in her confession. I, too, refused to drift into the darkness. Their hands brushed as she offered the flute. "Then let us watch each other through the sleepless hours. When one tires, the other will keep vigil." In that moment, a bridge formed between them. Two souls, both marked by insomnia's toll, found kinship in shared defiance. The warmth of that connection spread through Tahar's chest, as if a candle had been lit within. Warmth, betrayal, and fracturing bonds. For several nights, Tahar and Nefret met beneath the papyrus canopy. They exchanged stories, his trials in the temple, her haunting lullabies for lost loved ones. He taught her the protective chants. She taught him to find solace in melody. Yet the fragile unity of their bond could not defy the currents of power and suspicion forever. One humid night, as they sat by a brazier sipping cool water, a group of temple guards descended upon them. An overseer accused Tahar of fraternizing with unauthorized persons, a serious offense. Tahar protested, "She's no threat. She only plays music." The guards sneered. "Music is a luxury for the elite. Here it is contraband." They seized Nefret's flute, snapping it in two. She let out a cry that became a gasp as one guard's elbow drove into her stomach. Tahar sprang forward, only to be pinned by two others. A hush fell over the market as the guards dragged Nefret away. Tahar's heart pounded as if it might break free. He tasted blood in his mouth from a cut lip. The crowd dispersed silently, unwilling to intervene. In the temple's inner courtyard, Yuseb intercepted him. His eyes, once kind, were now hard. "You risked your life for this musician?" he demanded. "The order cannot sustain internal distractions. We need focus and purity of purpose." Tahar's voice wavered. She offered hope, a moment's peace. Yuseb grabbed his shoulder. "Peace is a myth. Survival is our path." With those words, the senior scribe turned away, an act of betrayal more cutting than any blade. Tahar staggered backward, body trembling, not from exhaustion alone, but from the rupture of a sacred trust. Alone now, Tahar wandered toward the temple gate. The torchlight danced over broken papyrus and scattered produce. The silence he had once craved now felt like an abyss. Sleep had robbed him of rest. The elite had commodified it. The guards had destroyed his sanctuary of music, and Yuseb had abandoned him in favor of doctrinal rigidity. Aftermath, bonds fractured. In the nights that followed, Tahar found himself isolated. The laborers no longer met his gaze. The scribes avoided his presence. Even the senior priests kept their distance, whispering of potential danger to the temple's harmony. He retreated to the outer wall, where the stars traced silent arcs overhead. The fields beyond were dark and still. Somewhere in the distance, the bray of a jackal pierced the night. He realized that the world he had hoped to reshape with his sleepless vigil remained intact. A rigid hierarchy demanding sacrifice from the many, granting reward to the few. Yet, though his bonds had been fractured, Tahar still held one vital thread: the memory of Nefret's melody. In the depths of his mind, he could still hear the flute's lament, a haunting reminder that even in a society built on control and fear, beauty could bloom in the darkest hours. And as he stood under the indifferent stars, he vowed that his next act would not be born of ritual obedience or solitary endurance, but of defiance, channeled not through sleeplessness alone, but through a new unity, forged in shared suffering and the unbreakable promise of hope. As word spread of Pharaoh Neferkari's passing, the entire city of Perkar Shef bristled with anticipation. The grand ritual of universal sleep was to begin at dusk, an event never before witnessed by commoners. All walls were draped in linen shrouds. Torches blazed along the funeral procession route. Even those who normally toiled under the moonlight laid down their tools in somber unity. Tahar, honored by his recent trials, was invited to join the inner circle of priests guiding the rite. They moved in a silent cortege toward the royal mortuary temple, carrying the sarcophagus on a gilded bark. At its bow, the great lector chanted the spell of endless repose. "O spirits of air and earth, grant this monarch the deep sleep of stars. Let his breath merge with the cosmic breath. Let his heart rest beneath the tranquil water of none." One by one, the priests lit incense burners, jars of frankincense and myrrh, whose smoke twisted into spirals, reaching for the painted ceiling. Inhaling the sacred fumes, Tahar felt a rush of euphoria. The strains of a funeral dirge on reed pipes swelled in the hush. At the heart of the chamber, the universal bed lay wait, a massive slab of alabaster, carved with symbols of rebirth. According to legend, any who slept upon it during the rite would share in the pharaoh's journey through Duat, emerging spiritually renewed. As the funeral liturgy reached its crescendo, dozens of priests and nobles lay down, weaving their arms and feet together in a communal embrace. Tahar hesitated, recalling his vow never to surrender to sleep. But the air throbbed with collective expectation. The incense burned golden halos around every head. Amid the pounding of his pulse, he felt an impulse stronger than fear, a longing to transcend his own exhaustion. With a measured breath, he stepped onto the alabaster slab and lay down among them. For a moment, the temple seemed to hold its breath. Then, as the lector uttered the final words of the spell, a wave of darkness rolled over Tahar's vision. No longer the stifling heat of the temple courtyard, he found himself adrift on a river of stars. The reeds under his cheek turned to liquid starlight. The scent of myrrh became the fragrance of galaxies in bloom. Exaltation surged through him. He felt his consciousness expand beyond his fragile body. Memories of relentless nights, of biting insects, of flickering torches, all dissolved into a radiant mesh of cosmic light. He soared alongside his ancestors, whose voices joined in a chorus of triumph and lament. The borders of time collapsed. He glimpsed Israel's Red Sea parting, Athens' students debating beneath olive trees, and vast legions marching under eagles. Then the silence descended. The chorus faded, replaced by a profound stillness, an emptiness so profound it felt like creation itself pausing to listen. Tahar's heart stilled, his mind unclenched. In that space, he encountered no threat, only the serene pulse of existence. And there, at the threshold of absolute quiet, came his personal revelation. Sleep was never the enemy. Rather, it was a mirror, reflecting the ebb and flow of consciousness. Denying sleep had been his act of defiance against fear, but embracing its mystery was the true path to awakening. In the silence, images coalesced before him, an anachronistic vision transcending millennia. He saw modern descendants, faces aglow with the light of miniature suns, gadgets held in anxious hands, men and women nursing steaming cups of bitter brew, coffee at dawn. Eyes ringed with exhaustion from nights spent chasing tasks and diversions. They moved through sleek, glass-filled temples of commerce, rarely pausing to close their eyes. Their cities pulsed with electric hum, a modern counterpart to his temple's torchlit rituals. He watched them stumble through boardrooms, classrooms, operating theaters, awake yet half asleep, bodies alive but spirits muted. He felt their yearning for rest even as they filled the nights with artificial light. At once, he perceived a truth. The struggle against sleep, born in his own age of incense and alabaster, had blossomed into a global epidemic. In every era, humans waged war on the darkness, believing themselves masters of time, yet always at risk of losing their souls in the process. A gentle tug called him back. The chorus of ancestors returned, not as specters, but as guiding lights. They whispered, "Balance, Tahar. Know when to wake and when to sleep. In rest lies renewal. In wakefulness, purpose." With a soft gasp, he opened his eyes to the torchlit temple. Around him, dozens of others stirred, faces unfocused, bodies slack. The funeral had ended. The pharaoh's body was now sealed in its tomb. The priests rose, chanting the closing benediction. Tahar felt the warmth of life flood back into his limbs, and a profound serenity that no amount of forced wakefulness had ever granted him. He stepped off the universal bed and knelt before the sarcophagus, placing his palm on the gilded lid. "I sleep in trust," he whispered. "I wake in wisdom." As he guided the other priests from the chamber, he carried with him the vision of the sleepless generations to come, and the promise that the secret to true transformation lay not in denying sleep, but in honoring its sacred ebb and flow. 5 nights had passed since Tahar last surrendered to true sleep. His body felt as if it were unspooled, nerve endings raw from constant vigilance. Each breath was a labor, each heartbeat a reminder that his mind teetered on the brink of collapse. Yet he pressed on, driven by purpose and fear in equal measure. On the dawn of the sixth day, he awoke before the first glimmer of sunrise. His mother, Marakara, lay on a straw pallet beside him, her breaths shallow and uneven. He reached out, brushing the damp hair from her forehead. Her skin was ice cold, clammy with sweat even though the air was cool. The lines around her eyes, once etched by a lifetime of storytelling and laughter, were now deep chasms of pain. "Mama," he whispered, voice cracking. She opened her eyes, clouded but still bright with maternal warmth. "My son," she croaked, "your eyes, they shine like desert stars, but your body is failing." Tahar bit back the urge to collapse against her frame. He had no strength to carry her to the temple's healing chamber. His own struggles had left him hollow, unable even to tend the simplest wound. He pressed his mother's hand to his lips. "Rest, Mama. Close your eyes. I will watch over you." She managed a frail smile. "You watch over me even in my dreams. But I am weary, Tahar. My journey nears its end." Tahar's heart clenched. She had raised him on tales of Duat and the promise of renewal beyond death. Yet facing her own mortal dusk, her faith wavered. He stroked her hand, willing her breaths to steady. When the first pale light crept through the reed mat walls, he slipped away, unable to stay and watch her fade. By mid-morning, Tahar stood in the western courtyard of the temple, quill in hand, attempting to copy the sacred book of gates. His hand shook so violently that letters blurred into formless shapes. The senior scribe, Yuseb, noticed and barked, "Maintain focus, boy. Every stroke honors the pharaoh's passage." Tahar's throat burned. He wished to scream that his mother lay dying, that he could no longer feel his own limbs. But he forced himself to continue, tracing each hieroglyph with painstaking care. He had pledged himself to the ritual of the sleepless order, 5 continuous days without rest to demonstrate his unwavering devotion. To break now, even for a few moments, would dishonor that vow. As the hours crawled by, his vision flickered. He saw flickers of movement, his mother's face above his own, her lips parting in a final message. He blinked, trying to clear the phantom, but the image remained, her eyes pleading, her frailty laid bare. He pushed the quill across the papyrus in uneven arcs, the sacred words trailing off into scratches. By the time the sun reached its zenith, his body demanded release. His joints ached, and at the base of his skull, a scream of pain pulsed in time with the Nile's flowing current. Yet still, he resisted. The vow held him fast. To rest now would mean admitting defeat, and defeat was a luxury neither he nor his family could afford. Late in the afternoon, word spread through the temple that Marakara had died. The announcement came as an echo across the stone corridors, silent yet thunderous. Tahar watched from the scriptorium's threshold as her body was carried on a bier draped in white linen. Priests chanted the opening of the mouth rite, their voices low and steady, invoking Anubis and Osiris to guide her spirit safely into Duat. Other scribes wept quietly. Temple servants scattered dust on their heads in ritual mourning. But Tahar remained rooted, eyes locked on the procession. Part of him longed to join his mother's bier and lie beside her in somber solidarity. Instead, he stayed, hand gripping his quill so tightly that his knuckles whitened. When Yuseb caught sight of him, the old scribe ascended the dais and addressed the gathered mourners. "Her passage is complete," he intoned. "Her soul joins the eternal court. We honor her by fulfilling our sacred duties." He paused, casting a stern glance at Tahar. "The ritual of vigilance continues. The pharaoh's rites must not be delayed." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some offered sympathetic glances. Others, hardened by duty, averted their eyes. Tahar closed his mouth, fear and grief warring in his chest. He felt the ground shift beneath him, as if the earth itself judged him. That night, the funeral pyre burned bright at the river's edge. Tahar stood among the priests, watching flames lick the sky. The cedarwood logs cracked and spitted, sending showering embers into darkness. He kept his quill tied to his wrist, a talisman, a shackle. Sweat dripped from his brow, carrying the smell of ash and burning flesh. He knew what was required next. Another night of vigil, copying spells to secure the pharaoh's rebirth. Then, in a few hours, he would stand before the universal bed, his vow still unbroken. But his mother's absence weighed upon him like a stone. His promise to watch over her in life now felt hollow. He had failed her when she needed him most. A wind stirred, ruffling the reeds that formed the tent walls. He stumbled, as if struck by an unseen hand. Tahar's thoughts spiraled. Does loyalty to ritual outrank loyalty to blood? Is honor born of vows greater than compassion for kin? The rites he had once embraced with fervor now felt like chains binding his heart to cruelty. At the temple's inner sanctuary, the bark bearers moved the sarcophagus of the pharaoh into place. Tahar joined the circle, but his hands trembled as they adjusted the Venetian blinds that surrounded the universal bed. Candles guttered in the hush, the air thick with myrrh. Yuseb approached, his expression inscrutable. "You hesitate, Tahar. What troubles you?" he asked, voice low. Tahar swallowed the lump in his throat. My mother." His words caught. He could not utter death's name in this holy place. "She passed at dusk." Yuseb's eyes narrowed. "We all lose kin, but the living demand service." He gestured to the bed. "Will you lay down with us, or will you break your vow?" Tahar clenched his jaw. The choice hung before him like two diverging paths. One led to ritual fulfillment, glory among the sleepless. The other led back to his mother's side, into the arms of grief and perhaps redemption. His body trembled, mind racing. If he slept, his order would brand him a deserter. If he stayed awake, he would betray the one person who had given him life. He pressed his palm to the cool stone floor, grounding himself. Memories of Marakara flooded his senses. Her lullabies beside the Nile, the stories she whispered about stars and gods. He remembered her final whisper, "Rest, my son," but also her love's unspoken plea, to not lose his humanity in the pursuit of divine favor. Tahar rose, voice steady with resolve. "I cannot stand vigil tonight," he declared, eyes locked with Yuseb's. "My mother's spirit calls me home." Gasps spread through the priests. Yuseb's jaw tightened, but Tahar pressed on. "I have kept my vow long enough. There is honor in duty, but greater honor in mercy and love." Yuseb's face was an unreadable mask. After a long moment, he inclined his head. "Go then. But know this, your place among us is forfeit." Tahar did not flinch. He turned and left the sanctuary, footsteps echoing down the corridor. The torches flared in his path, as if bidding him farewell. Outside, the courtyard was bathed in pale moonlight. Tahar dashed toward his mother's body, now laid out on a bier beneath a canopy of palm fronds. He knelt beside her, pressing his cheek to her cold hand. "Forgive me," he whispered, tears carving tracks through the dust on his face. I should have been here. In the hush, he heard a soft rustle, the scrawl of wings. A scarab beetle scuttled across the bier, its shell catching the moon's glow. Tahar's heart stuttered. In his sleepless visions, the scarab had appeared as a guardian, a herald of renewal. Seeing it now felt like a sign that love and humanity could transcend vows. He closed his eyes, placing his other hand over his mother's heart. In that silent communion, he felt a warmth bloom in his chest, an affirmation that he had chosen the right path. Though he had broken his vow, he had preserved his soul. By dawn, Tahar stood at the riverbank, holding his mother's now empty shroud above the water. He cast it into the current, watching as it drifted toward Duat's unseen shores. The first light painted the horizon gold. He inhaled deeply, tasting hope on the breeze. Behind him, the temple loomed, its rituals continuing without him. But Tahar no longer feared their condemnation. He understood now that the greatest transformation arises not from unyielding discipline, but from acts of compassion that honor both the divine and the human heart. His vigil had reached its breaking point, and from that fracture, a new resolve took shape. A resolve to forge a path guided not by vows alone, but by love, mercy, and the truth that sometimes the bravest act is to let go. The morning after, Tahar reclaimed his humanity. Word of his defiance rippled through Perkar Shef like a dropped torch, setting tinder alight. Whispers followed him in the temple corridors, the young scribe who abandoned the sleepless order for the sake of kin. Some priests praised his courage in secret. Others condemned him as a traitor to the pharaoh's cause. Unrest blossomed by dusk. The temple leadership, still seething from Tahar's departure, announced a citywide rite, the great vigil of the sleepless mass, a communal ceremony designed to reinforce unity and demonstrate unwavering devotion to the gods. Every household was summoned, nobles, scribes, laborers, even the children of the marketplace. On pain of spiritual pollution, none could abstain. As night fell, torches flared along the broad causeway. At its center stood the Hall of 10,000 Eyes, an open courtyard carved with dozens of alcoves, one for each clan. In each alcove, a stone platform awaited the sleeper's totem, amulets of lapis lazuli and cinnabar, tokens of personal piety. Tahar arrived last, carrying only his mother's lotus-tinted amulet on a simple braid of reed fiber. He paused at the threshold, heart heavy. This was the rite he had once revered, now corrupted into a grotesque show of power. All around, families gathered, mothers clasped children, laborers stretched tired limbs, elders leaned on canes but straightened at the call of trumpets. The high priestess ascended the dais. Draped in robes of dusk blue, she raised her staff carved with the head of Horus. "Tonight," she proclaimed, voice echoing, "we bind ourselves in watchful solidarity. Let no mind wander, let no soul stray. Our collective vigilance is the shield that protects the land and its ruler in death's dark hour." At her signal, trumpets blared. One by one, voices joined in the chant of unbroken eyes, a drone rising in volume. "We see, we keep, we wake." The chant stretched into the sky like a web of sound. Midnight approached, and at precisely the 15th hour of the ceremony, the giant censer in the courtyard center began to emit clouds of potent incense. The aroma, clove, myrrh, and a bitter herb forbidden to the common folk, spread rapidly. Its purpose, to heighten awareness, to sharpen the mind against drowsiness. Instead, it unleashed something far more dangerous. Within minutes, the first cracks appeared. A woman from the North Clan clutched her head, moaning as ghostly faces flickered behind her eyelids. A hushed gasp passed through her neighbors before her cries turned into screams. She collapsed, thrashing on the stone as if pursued by unseen horrors. Two priests rushed to clamp rings of cooled copper around her wrists, an emergency talisman said to bind malevolent spirits. But the crisis only deepened. Dozens more convulsed. Men spat foam. Women clawed at their tunics. Children wailed for their mothers. The high priestess's voice faltered mid-chant. "Bind the afflicted. Seal the alcoves," she ordered. Guards hustled into action, corralling the delirious away from the sacrificial platforms. In the ensuing chaos, the chant of unbroken eyes fractured into discordant shrieks and sobs. Families separated in panic. Fathers abandoned their posts, chasing after stumbling wives. Mothers fled clutching sick children. The grand design of unity disintegrated as the courtyard became a battlefield between order and disarray. From the shadows, Tahar watched his former comrades, those who once stood sentinel alongside him, now caught in a nightmare of their own making. He felt no triumph in their downfall, only pity. With the chirp of crickets as a grotesque counterpoint, he sprinted closer. A cluster of afflicted scribes, their quills still tied to wrists, swirled in a frenzied dance. Their papyrus scrolls lay abandoned on the ground, ink smeared by trembling hands. One touched his temple, eyes rolling back. The gods burn inside us," he rasped before toppling forward. Tahar knelt beside him and pressed a palm to his forehead. The man's flesh was feverish. Tahar whispered a simple prayer of release, one his mother had taught him, and gently tilted the man's head back. "Rest now," he murmured. "You're safe." At the courtyard's edge, the high priestess had retreated to her dais, flanked by acolytes. She raised her staff, voice stern. "By decree of the temple, the rite is suspended. Carry the sufferers to the house of healing. All participants are commanded to withdraw to their homes under guard." Murmurs of relief rippled through those still coherent. The guards changed tone, swapping ritual staff for blunt batons, driving the unsteady and unaffected alike toward the outer gates. Flames from torches sputtered as if outraged by the disorder. Tahar seized the moment of pause. "We must help them," he urged a pair of acolytes nearby. "This is no divine trial. It's poison and panic." Together, they formed an impromptu chain, passing fevered and frenzied bodies to waiting healers stationed beyond the courtyard. Tahar stayed at the front, safeguarding frightened children who clung to his robes. In the confusion, the high priestess descended the dais, her skirts pooling around her like storm clouds. She approached Tahar. "You intrude on sacred order, scribe," she hissed. "Your interference undermines the god's will." Tahar refused to bow. "This is not the god's will. It's madness sown by arrogance. You forced every household into this smithy of fear. Now you desert them when it matters most." Her nostrils flared. "You dare accuse the temple's leadership?" She spat. "These people nearly succumbed to divine rapture. We saved them." He met her glare evenly. "Divine rapture does not produce vomiting and delirium. It is your incense and forced vigil that broke them. The gods demand balance, compassion as well as devotion." Her staff trembled. For a heartbeat, she seemed about to strike him. Then she turned away, her robes sweeping the ground. "You will be judged for this defiance," she said over her shoulder. "Temple law knows no mercy." As the courtyard emptied, Tahar helped carry the last of the afflicted to the house of healing. Lanterns glowed inside, revealing rows of mats and bowls of cool water. He arranged them gently, murmuring words of comfort drawn from the sacred texts. A healer pressed a cooling poultice to his forehead in thanks. Outside, the moon rode high. The broad causeway lay deserted, torches unlit. Tahar walked alone through the hush, each step echoing against limestone walls. He paused by an alcove where dozens of amulets lay scattered, lapis shards and cinnabar beads dulled by dust and blood. He gathered a handful, closing his fist around them until the stones cut into his palm. A wind stirred, lifting his hair. He looked up at the silent sky. The stars glimmered, undisturbed by mortal folly. In their cold light, he understood the stakes. The community had teetered on the brink of disintegration, its faith and social bonds shattered by the temple's hubris. Religion, meant to unite, had almost torn their world apart. Tahar pressed the amulets to his chest, a vow forming in his heart. He would not abandon his people to the whims of fear-driven rituals. Whatever awaited him, censure, exile, even death, he would stand as a guardian of balance between devotion and compassion. The night's chaos had revealed the cost of blind obedience, shattered families, poisoned minds, a community in disarray. Now, the true struggle lay ahead, rebuilding trust, healing hearts, and forging a faith that honored human limits as well as divine mysteries. When dawn's first light broke over the Nile, a new decree thundered across all of Upper Egypt. Under penalty of divine wrath, no man, woman, or child shall slumber by day. It was proclaimed from the temple steps by the high priesthood, an edict born not from compassion, but from fear that Duat's demons prowled the sunlit hours as surely as the nocturnal ones. Tahar first heard the news in the scriptorium, where temple scribes assembled to copy the decree onto countless ostraca. The messenger, an austere lector with sunken cheeks, read the words aloud. Sleep by day is the open gateway through which malevolent forces enter the realm of the living. Only the darkness conceals their approach. Thus, to preserve Mot, all daytime repose is forbidden. A hush fell over the hall. Pens hovered above pottery shards, ink dried mid-stroke. The senior scribe, Yuseb, slammed his stylus against a table. Madness, he thundered. This violates every tenet of balance. How can the people labor in the fields or rest their bodies under the relentless sun? But the lector's station was sacrosanct. One by one, the scribes resumed their work in silence, each word an echo of the temple's growing paranoia. Outside, Tahar saw common folk stumbling through the market streets, rubbing bleary eyes, clutching sun-bleached cloths to stave off exhaustion. Crisis in the faith. Within days, the edict set in motion a cascade of social and spiritual upheaval. Peasant revolt in Aton's fields. At the granaries near Memphis, laborers collapsed in the midday heat. Denied the brief siestas that once restored their strength, they accused temple officials of sacrilege. A group of enraged workers set fire to the local precinct, destroying stocks of crushed cinnamon used in sacred ointments. Soldiers quelled the riot with whips, but the message was clear. The people no longer saw the temple as protector, but as oppressor. Temple factionalism. Within the priesthood itself, schisms appeared. Conservative priests argued that the edict was essential to avert apocalyptic chaos. Ancient texts spoke of sun worshippers who fell prey to shadow demons at midday. Reformist priests, including several close to Tahar, countered that the gods intended humans to follow natural cycles and that punishment lay in denying bodies their rest. Meetings in hidden chambers grew heated. Some priests even performed secret rites to counteract the ban, laying out water basins for ritual sleep and whispering reassurances to frightened acolytes. Public panic and quack remedies. Vendors in the streets capitalized on the crisis. They sold vials of powdered lotus to ward off demon visions, contraband papyri promising lucid dreaming under the sun, and charcoal amulets claimed to absorb malevolent spirits. Ordinary families, desperate for reprieve, embrace these panaceas, often to tragic effect. A merchant's daughter, after inhaling too heavily from a counterfeit anti-demon incense, slipped into a fevered coma, believed by her father to be possession rather than poisoning. Underground sleep Sabbaths. In hidden courtyards and private chambers, dissident communities formed sleep Sabbaths, clandestine gatherings where participants defied the edict, lying in silent vigil beneath woven mats. Tahar joined one such circle, gathering with former laborers, musicians, and marginalized priests. They lit small oil lamps, recited protective charms passed down orally, and sank into brief, guilt-laced slumbers. Each night, fear of discovery loomed. Temple guards patrolled the streets, arresting any caught with eyelids drooping. Tahar's ordeal. For Tahar, the ban hit at the core of his transformed beliefs. In level 2, he had learned that denial of sleep could be a path to purification. In level 4, he had glimpsed sleep's sacred role in renewal. Now, he faced the stark question: was repudiating natural rest in service to the gods truly an act of devotion, or a desecration of Mot? He spent midday hours in the Grand Library, poring over archaic scrolls. One fragment from the Temple of Thoth at Hermopolis read, "The sun's course is the eye of Ra. To close one's own is to turn away from truth. Yet at noon, the body demands stillness." This is Ra's silent voice guiding us to reflection. Another papyrus, smuggled from Elephantine, countered, "He who slumbers by daylight risks letting Set's minions slip between worlds. Best to watch the sky's radiance unbroken." Between these conflicting injunctions, Tahar felt himself unraveling. He sought out the reformist priestess, Mary Ra, who had once aided him after Wave 2's chaos. She greeted him in a secluded sanctum, lined with alabaster basins filled with scented water. "You look as though you have not slept in a year," she observed gently. "I haven't," he admitted, collapsing onto a stone bench. "Day and night alike are filled with dread. At dawn, I fear demonic entry. At dusk, I fear the trials of sleep. How can we serve gods who afflict us so?" Mary Ra pressed a cool hand to his forehead. "The crisis is of our own making. The temple errs when it separates the divine cycle from the human one. We must remind the people and the gods that Mot thrives in balance, not in extremes." She proposed a bold plan, a counter-ritual to restore equilibrium. Under cover of darkness, Tahar and a small cadre of priests would place offerings at 4 cardinal shrines of Ra, invoking the sun god's mercy for his children's fatigue and pleading for a new decree. The counter-ritual at Karnak, under a crescent moon, Tahar led the procession along the Nile's western bank, carrying jars of scented oils and loaves of fruited bread, symbols of nourishment and renewal. They paused at dawn's first light before the pylons of Karnak, where a near-mythic aura still clung to stone. Forming a circle, they lit 4 torches, east, south, west, north, and chanted the litany of radiant repose, a lost hymn rediscovered in Mary Ra's private library. "O Ra, your brilliance sustains us by day. Your warmth comforts us by night. Grant your children the gift of rest that they may serve you with renewed strength and walk the path of Mot in all hours. As the final words echoed against the columns, a sudden gust swept through the courtyard. The torches flared, licking higher, and then steadied. Tahar inhaled deeply. The air, heavy moments before, with oppressive humidity, now felt lighter, as if blessed by unseen hands. Silence fell. In that hush, Tahar felt a subtle shift in the world, a soft exhalation, as though the earth itself sighed in relief. Then, from the distant peaks of the Theban hills, came the sound of temple bells, not in warning, but in gentle peal. Aftermath, crisis, and compromise. News of the clandestine ritual spread like dawn, breaking over the desert. Some hailed it as heresy. Others saw it as an act of mercy. Within a week, the high priesthood issued a revised edict. Daytime sleep, when taken in measured intervals and accompanied by ritual purification, shall be permitted for the health of all. The people are urged to maintain watchfulness at dawn and dusk, the sacred hours of transition. This compromise, though imperfect, stilled the worst of the chaos. Sluggish workers once more took short rests at midday. Underground sleep Sabbaths surfaced into sanctioned purification pauses, small ceremonies led by reformist priests, including Mary Ra. The market scent of fake incense and overpriced amulets receded as true charms. Fresh lotus and genuine frankincense returned to favor. Yet the crisis left scars. Trust between the temple and the populace had been frayed. Rumors lingered of secret police who had beaten dissenters. Factional priests eyed one another warily, uncertain if the compromise would hold beyond the reign of the current pharaoh. For Tahar, the ordeal was both a triumph and a reckoning. He had helped avert societal collapse, but at the cost of defying sacred authority. His status in the temple was uncertain. Some lauded him as a visionary, others as a dangerous agitator. Standing beneath a midday sun, its warmth now more bearable thanks to the revised decree, Tahar reflected on the paradox. The very fear of demons had nearly unleashed far greater horrors. In the end, it was neither blind obedience nor isolated rebellion, but courageous mediation that saved both faith and community. As he prepared to return to the scriptorium, quill in hand, to record the most turbulent chapter of Egyptian belief, Tahar understood that history's true conflicts were rarely about simple right or wrong. They were about navigating the fragile balance between order and compassion, divine law and human need, dawn's promise and night's mystery. After the tumult of societal upheaval, Tahar found himself caught between two worlds, the unyielding daylight of duty and the shadowed threshold of dreams. Sleep had once been condemned as a demonic gateway. Wakefulness had been lauded as divine devotion. Now, he stood at the edge of a deeper question. Which realm is truer, the world we live in or the world we dream? Prelude to the trance. On the seventh night after the revised edict, Tahar returned to the sanctuary where the universal bed lay dormant. The alabaster slab bore the faint residue of incense and dried lotus petals from Neferker's funeral rite. Candlelight danced along its carved hieroglyphs, animating the winged scarab that Tahar had come to see as his guide between life and dream. Mary Ra awaited him there, flanked by two acolytes. "Tonight," she said softly, "we traverse the boundary. You will yield to the ritual trance and witness both worlds as one." Tahar nodded, heart pounding. He wore the simple reed linen tunic of a reformist priest, his mother's carved lotus amulet resting against his chest. He knelt before the bed, placed hands flat against its cool surface, and closed his eyes. entering the ritual trance. At Mary Ra's signal, the acolytes began a low, rhythmic chant, words lost to time but suffused with power. Their voices wove in and out of one another, rising and falling in measured cadence. Veil of night, veil of day, open the path where spirits play. Let the sleeper's truth be shown, in realm of flesh and realm unknown. Above, the temple's domed ceiling faded into a star-speckled void. Tahar's chest rose and fell with the chant, each breath carrying him deeper. His eyelids fluttered as the scarab on the bed glowed, its wings beating in slow motion. The world dissolved around him. He first felt weightlessness, his body floating above the alabaster. Then came the pressure of dusted air, the scent of lotus blooms, and the distant echo of temple bells. Reality began to fracture into facets. The tactile chill of stone, the warmth of sweat, the whisper of incense smoke. And then he heard her voice, his mother's, clear as day. Sleep, my son. Let go. The dreamscape unfolds. When Tahar opened his eyes again, he was standing on the banks of a vast, mirror-smooth lake under a lavender sky. The water reflected two suns, one blazing gold, the other a pale silver. On the far shore, a procession of figures moved in perfect silence. Scribes, priests, laborers, musicians, faces he recognized from his life. They carried lit torches and lotus garlands, each step leaving ripples that glowed like fired bricks. As he watched, the figures paused and turned toward him. Their eyes were blank pools of light. Tahar felt a jolt of vertigo. Here were the living and the dead, the waking and the dreaming, gathered together in a portrait of unity beyond mortal laws. He took a hesitant step forward. The surface of the lake rippled beneath his sandals. When he reached the water's edge, his reflection stared back, yet it was both him and not him. Older, eyes rimmed in silver, bearing the weight of untold ages. A voice whispered on the breeze, "Is this the world you feared, or the world you have yet to learn?" Confronting the duality, Tahar looked beyond the procession to the sun-swept land behind him. There he saw modern descendants in ghostly apparition, figures bent over glowing screens, clutching steaming mugs of coffee, wandering through cities of steel and glass with eyes too wide to rest. They moved like specters, awake yet imprisoned, chasing the endless hum of progress. His heart ached. He recognized their desperation, their denial of natural rest. In their pursuit of productivity and pleasure, they had become slaves to a new form of the old curse, unable to close their eyes lest they miss a moment of artificial life. Turning back to the dream shore, the procession knelt and laid offerings at the feet of a towering obelisk of polished obsidian. The obelisk's surface began to shimmer, revealing scenes of ancient rituals, of communal feasts, of midnight labors in scorching heat, and then shifting to neon-lit streets, boardrooms, hospital wards, and classrooms where exhausted souls stood at podiums and assembly lines. Tahar realized the dreamscape was a tapestry of human striving, past and present woven into a single thread. Each act of vigilance, each denial of rest, echoed through time, binding generations in a cycle of longing and loss. The choice and the epiphany. He knelt beside the scarab-carved obelisk and pressed his palm to its smooth surface. The stone warmed beneath his hand, pulsing with a heartbeat not his own. He closed his eyes and felt his consciousness stretch, a bridge between two horizons. In that suspended moment, he heard Mary Ra's chant transform into a chorus of voices. His mother, Nefret the musician, Yuseb in his final forgiving smile, laborers resting beneath acacia trees, scribes singing hymns to Ra. They spoke as one. Balance is our gift. Rest is our right. Wake with purpose, sleep with trust. In twilight's embrace, life and spirit unite. A beam of light shot down from the lavender sky, enveloping Tahar like a benediction. His mind expanded until there was no boundary between dream and reality. No need to question which was truer. Both realms were facets of existence, one of action and decision, the other of reflection and renewal. Returned to waking. A gentle breeze stirred his hair, and he felt the chill of the alabaster against his back. Opening his eyes, Tahar found himself lying on the universal bed. Mary Ra, leaning close, her own eyes bright with unshed tears of awe. He rose slowly, gazing at the hieroglyphs that now seemed to glow with new meaning. "I have seen both worlds," he whispered. Dream and waking fold into one truth, that life is measured by acts of compassion and light and acts of healing and rest. Mary Ra placed a hand over his heart. "You have embraced the paradox. You are reborn." Tahar stepped away from the bed and onto the torchlit floor. He felt no disorientation, only a serene clarity. In the days to come, he would speak of this union of realms, teaching his people to honor both the day's duties and the night's mysteries. As he exited the sanctuary, the first birdsong greeted him, life renewing itself with each dawn. In his hand, he carried the dream scarab amulet, its wings outstretched in eternal flight. And with each confident step, he carried a new conviction. Reality and dream are inseparable. To live fully, one must both wake and sleep in harmony. Tahar returned to the scriptorium at dawn's first light, the morning after his ecstatic trance. The library's vaulted ceiling, once oppressive in its silence, now felt like a living canopy of possibility. Scrolls of papyrus lay in stacked alcoves, their corners curling like the wings of sleeping birds. He sought the Hall of Hidden Wisdom, a secluded chamber reserved for texts too potent for ordinary priests. Few knew its entrance, a narrow gap behind the statue of Thoth, god of writing and knowledge. Tahar pressed his hand against the weathered stone, felt the subtle shift of gears, and stepped inside. A single shaft of light illuminated dust motes that danced like restless spirits. His heart pounded. He remembered the admonitions of the high priesthood. No text older than the 5th dynasty must be read without sanction. Forbidden knowledge corrupts as readily as it enlightens. Yet something urged him onward. A memory from his trance of a shadowed figure whispering secrets of balance. On a shelf, carved from rosewood, lay a scroll tied in faded yellow linen. Tahar's fingers trembled as he untied the cord. The scribbles across the papyrus were in archaic hieratic, the script of the temple's earliest devotees. He unrolled the scroll, inhaling the scent of age and resin. His eyes raced over the first lines, but the true shock came in the middle section, written in bold strokes. "The gods do not need your sleep. It is those who reign over you who dread your clarity of thought." Tahar stilled, the papyrus trembling in his grasp. His mind flashed back to the elders who forbade daytime rest, to the petty politicians who'd exploited fear of demons to tighten their grip on power, to the sacred edicts twisted into instruments of control. A wave of betrayal crashed through him. Every forced vigil, every poisonous incense ritual, every tearful mother denied a moment's rest, had been orchestrated not by divine decree, but by mortal hands terrified of an awakened populace. The knowledge was incendiary. If sleep was not a threat to the gods, then the temple's leadership had lied. He pressed the scroll to his chest, the linen stiff against his skin. Memory after memory surged, Yuseb insisting that Tahar honor his vow above his mother's death. The high priestess smirking when Nefret's flute was broken. Guards hauling families from their sleep Sabbaths. All those actions now took on a new, sinister pattern, an elaborate campaign to dull critical thought, to keep citizens perpetually fatigued, dependent on the temple for guidance and relief. Tahar staggered back into the corridor, heart hammering. He sank onto a stone bench, scroll in hand, and ran his fingers over the ancient ink. Words blurred with emotion, his shock dissolving into a fierce clarity. This was no mere doctrinal dispute. It was a liberation of truth, long buried beneath veneer and ritual. Betrayal gave way to catharsis. The scroll offered a salve for decades of institutional wounds. He felt his spirit expand with purpose. He would bring this truth to light, not to dismantle faith itself, but to restore its integrity. Mott demanded honesty as much as reverence. He rose, tucking the scroll into the folds of his tunic. Outside the chamber, the library's corridors hummed with morning activity. Young acolytes carried trays of ink pots. Senior scribes debated ratios of gallnut to vinegar. All remained oblivious to the seismic shift reshaping Tahar's soul. Stepping into the sunlit courtyard, he paused under the fronds of a date palm. The world seemed suspended between shadow and light, much like sleep itself. In that moment, he committed to a singular mission: to confront the temple leadership and reveal their deception, even at the risk of exile or worse. Tahar recalled the scarab symbolism, the promise of regeneration through trial. He would roll this ancient truth forward into the public eye, unearthing a new era of balance where rest was no longer a privilege granted by fear, but a right secured by wisdom. He closed his eyes briefly and felt the scroll's weight against his heart. Then, with steady breath, he strode toward the great hall of decrees, where the high priestess and her council would gather at midday. The hush of anticipation settled around him, less an omen of dread, more a herald of transformation. As he ascended the dais steps, the scroll heavy in his hand, Tahar whispered the words of the ancients under his breath. Let the rulers tremble at the sight of truth. Let the people awaken in freedom's light. And with that vow, he prepared to cast open the gates of deception, unleashing a revelation that would shake the foundations of power and set his people on a path toward genuine enlightenment. Tahar stood before the coiled mass of sacred serpents as dawn's first light slipped into the temple's eastern alcove. The hiss of dozens of cobras blended with the drip of condensation from the vaulted ceiling. He felt the weight of every eye upon him, the high priestess's gilded gaze, the council's stony silence, and the invisible scrutiny of unseen deities whose favor he now contested. For months, the devilish scent of control had tainted every incense burner, every sleepless vigil, every decree forbidding the simple gift of rest. He had watched families tremble under the tyranny of fear, seen children's laughter drain from their faces as their eyelids fluttered in terror. Worse still, he had witnessed the temple's own ministers transform from caregivers of Mott into jailers of the body's most sacred need. Today, all that deception would end. In his hand, Tahar clutched the ancient scroll bearing the words of truth. The gods do not need your sleep. It is those who reign over you who dread your clarity of thought. He stepped forward onto the raised platform carved from black basalt, the scroll held aloft like a blazing chalice of revelation. The serpents writhed at his feet. their silver skin reflecting the morning light in mesmerizing patterns. He let his voice carry across the hush. For years, our people have been bound by mandates of terror. We have woven our nights into chains, believing we protected ourselves from demons. Yet those demons walked among us in robes of linen and gold, feeding on our exhaustion to keep our minds clouded. A ripple of shock passed through the assembled priests. The high priestess, resplendent in robes the color of twilight, stepped forward, lips parted in horrified disbelief. Tahar met her gaze without flinching. I present to you the oldest truth, he continued, unfolding the scroll. Read these words, words penned by our own forebears long before corruption seeped into our halls. The gods do not need your sleep. He let the scroll flutter in the gentle draft, as though offering it to all present. Some shielded their eyes, others leaned in, compelled by the gravity of the revelation. It is time for us to reclaim our nights, to honor sleep once more as a sacred ritual of renewal, he said, lowering the scroll, not as the fearful decree of a controlling few, but as an act of collective liberation. Silence stretched between them, like a drawn bow. Then, from the back of the gathering, a single voice spoke, an acolyte whose face Tahar recognized from the clandestine sleep Sabbaths. How shall we prove our sincerity? Words alone will not wash away years of deception. Tahar nodded. He turned and gestured to the coiled serpents arrayed around the platform's edge. These are the guardians of renewal, keepers of the right of the silent coil. Once every decade, a chosen soul sleeps among them to demonstrate perfect harmony with Mot, courage over fear, trust over control. Gasps rose from the priests. The rite of the silent coil had not been practiced for generations, its memory buried beneath the temple's growing dogma. The high priestess's brow furrowed. You propose that you, once a beacon of the sleepless order, now submit yourself to this archaic trial? She demanded. Yes, Tahar replied steadily. I offer my body and soul as testament. Let me sleep among the sacred serpents, and if I awaken unbitten, let that seal our return to true balance. A murmur of assent and alarm rippled through the courtyard. Some clergy protested. The serpents were too dangerous, the risk too great. But others, moved by the power of his conviction, stepped forward to form a circle of protection around the platform. Torches were lit, the air filled with the pungent aroma of lotus and myrrh. Mary Ra approached Tahar, placing a hand on his shoulder. May Ra's light guard your spirit, she whispered. He nodded, drawing a steadying breath. Gathering his robes above his waist, he climbed onto the basalt slab. The jagged edge of a cobra's hood brushed his calf, sending a thrill of terror through him. But he remained still. Cobra after cobra slithered around him, encircling his legs, coiling atop the cool stone, their hoods raised in silent salute. Tahar lay down, back to the slab, face turned toward the vaulted ceiling. He closed his eyes and drew in the thick, incense-laden air. Every muscle in his body quivered with expectation. Would he awaken to triumphant applause or to the agony of fangs sunk into his flesh? He began to chant softly, the protective verses his mother had taught him, litanies he had repeated in fevered delirium and ecstatic trance alike. May my rest be shielded by Ra's golden eye. May my heart lie in balance under the moon's pale radiance. May no harm befall this vessel in its sacred slumber. The serpents coiled more tightly, their heads bobbing as if listening. Torchlight flickered across their patterns, bands of ebony and ash, blurring dreamily as Tahar's breathing slowed. His body relaxed, tension ebbing with each recitation. The courtyard fell into a hush, broken only by his measured breath and the serpent's soft rustle. Time lost meaning. Minutes stretched into echoes, and Tahar felt himself drifting on a current of trust. He sensed the pulsation of the stone beneath him, the rhythm of distant footsteps of guardians stationed at the gates, the steady flame of torches whose embers now burned like dying stars. Then, darkness. His body slipped into oblivion. The serpents coiled closer, their bodies forming a living mandala of motion and stillness. They did not strike. They simply lay guard, keepers of the right, honoring his act of faith. How long he slept, Tahar could not say. In the depths of his slumber, he drifted between dream and waking, hearing faint echoes of chanting priests, the whisper of reeds by the Nile, the distant hum of human hearts. He saw visions of the oppressed breathing freely in soft twilight, of temples where lanterns of knowledge burned bright at night, of future generations lying in peaceful sleep, unshackled from fear. Then came the dawn. He stirred, eyelids fluttering as he returned to the world of heat and stone. The serpents had receded to the platform's edge, as though granting their blessing. Light shimmered on their hoods, casting dancing shadows across his still curled form. With a groan of muscles unused to repose, Tahar sat up. He looked around at the circle of priests and acolytes, their faces wide-eyed with awe. The high priestess knelt at his side, gently brushing a wisp of hair from his brow. "He lives," she whispered, voice thick with wonder. A ripple of joyous relief swept through the courtyard. Lamps were raised, trumpets sounded, and the guardians of the right stepped forward to lift Tahar from the slab. As he stood, he felt a surge of elation, and for the first time in years, a profound serenity born of genuine rest. He raised his hand, palm outward. "Behold the proof of true balance," he proclaimed. "Let sleep no longer be a weapon of fear, but the sanctuary of renewal. Let our nights be ours once more." In the days that followed, the right of the silent coil was restored as a symbol of collective trust. Sleep was re-sanctified in rituals both communal and private. Families gathered at dusk to share blessings before rest. The temple's wards again recognized the rhythm of day and night, and the oppressive edicts crumbled into memory. For Tahar, the serpent's kiss had been the culmination of his journey, a final trial that transformed his fear into faith, his anguish into action. In the embrace of those sacred coils, he had demonstrated that true power lies not in denying human need, but in honoring it as a bridge to wisdom. And as the desert sun rose high above the Nile, its golden rays glinting off the temple's alabaster walls, Tahar knew that a new chapter had begun, one written in the quiet moments between wakefulness and sleep, in the sweet surrender to renewal, and in the unshakable promise that freedom of mind begins with the right to rest. In a quiet gallery of the Cairo Museum, under soft LED lighting, calibrated to protect ancient manuscripts, Dr. Elena Rivera gingerly unrolled the final fragment of Tahar's scroll. She had unearthed this papyrus during last season's excavation at the tomb of Neferkare, tucked away behind a false wall adjacent to the royal sarcophagus. Its linen ties were brittle, its ink faded to warm sepia, but the last lines remained startlingly clear. "I have seen the dreams that all feared, and for that very reason, I have awakened." Elena paused, fingertips hovering just above the fragile fibers. The silence of the exhibit hall felt charged, as though the ghosts of Tahar and his contemporaries lingered in the still air. Behind her, the display cases held relics of the sleepless order, an iron-bound prayer book, an oil lamp scorched by incense, the soot-smudged robes of those who once defied the night. She looked up at her students, gathered close. Their faces reflected a mixture of astonishment and empathy. To them, Tahar's journey was more than an ancient curiosity. It was a cautionary mirror held up to the pace of modern life. "Think of our world today," Elena said, voice resonant in the vaulted space. "We live in a perpetual state of wakefulness, phones buzzing, screens glowing, deadlines marching ever closer. We treat sleep as a commodity to be traded, postponed, even suppressed, and we pay the price in health, creativity, and emotional well-being." A young scholar raised her hand. "Doctor Rivera, is there evidence that the Egyptians recognized these same costs?" Elena nodded, pointing to a nearby wall chart. "Yes. In Tahar's texts and the medical papyri of his era, we find warnings of fatigue-induced delirium, mood swings, weakened immunity. But those observations were drowned out by institutional mandates. Today, the corporate ethos echoes the temple's old edicts: hustle without pause. The gears of industry demand constant motion." She stepped over to the scroll and gently tapped the final lines. Tahar's declaration, "I have awakened," was not simply about leaving the realm of dreams. It was a bid to reclaim agency, to choose when to work, when to rest, when to reflect. His awakening was both literal and metaphorical. Behind them, the museum's security cameras blinked quietly. Across the hall, a neon-lit installation projected the words 24/7 in looping animation, an intentional counterpoint to the papyrus's ancient call for balance. Elena had curated it herself to provoke exactly this contrast: the unrelenting pace of contemporary life versus a civilization that once weaponized exhaustion to maintain control. "Archaeology," she continued, "is more than recovering artifacts. It's an invitation to dialogue across centuries. When Tahar's voice speaks to us, we hear the echo of our own choices. Are we truly awake, or merely sleepwalking through a world that prizes busyness over reflection?" Her students scribbled notes, faces thoughtful. One of them, arms folded, asked, "Can we apply Tahar's model of ritual rest to our own lives?" Elena smiled. "Absolutely. We already see a resurgence of digital Sabbaths, mandatory nap pods in some tech companies, even municipal bans on late-night deliveries. These efforts mirror the ancient pushback against enforced wakefulness, not to return us to primitive nights under torchlight, but to honor the human need for renewal." She stepped back and allowed the hushed reverence of the gallery to settle in. The scroll, once hidden behind royal secrets, now lay open to all who cared to read. Nearby, a placard quoted Tahar's words in both hieroglyphic facsimile and modern translation. "The gods do not need your sleep. It is those who reign over you, who dread your clarity of thought." A ripple of acknowledgement moved through the group. The students looked at one another as if sharing a silent vow: to guard their own rest, to resist the pressures of round-the-clock productivity, and to champion a culture that values the sanctity of sleep. Dr. Rivera dimmed the exhibit lights for a moment, then allowed them to glow again. "Let us honor Tahar," she said, "by ensuring that our present and our future are not built on the exhaustion of mind and body. May we awaken, not only from slumber, but from the unexamined rhythms that govern our lives." At the edge of the gallery, the neon 24/7 pulsed once more, then faded into darkness. And in the quiet that followed, the faint breath of ancient parchment seemed to whisper to every visitor, "Sleep deeply, live fully, and never let the fear of rest become the chains that bind your soul." At its core, Tahar's journey forces us to confront a fundamental question. Can humans remain fully human when stripped of the right to rest? Rest is not merely the absence of activity. It is a sacred space where memory is woven, creativity is kindled, and compassion is renewed. Deprived of rest, the body grows brittle, and the mind recedes into self-preservation. In Tahar's world, the enforced vigil wreaked havoc on relationships, social cohesion, and individual dignity. Today, as we champion grind culture and mock anything resembling downtime, we risk echoing those ancient oppressors, trading our humanity for the illusion of ceaseless productivity. Sleep often wears two masks. To some, it is escape, a flight from the burdens of consciousness into the theater of dreams. To others, it is resistance, a refusal to yield one's agency to the demands of an unforgiving world. Tahar first saw sleep as a portal to danger, then reclaimed it as a right to define his own balance. In modern life, insomnia can signal anxiety or ambition, yet our voluntary wakefulness sometimes mirrors institutional coercion. When we forgo rest to meet relentless expectations, whether set by bosses, by markets, or by our own perfectionism, we blur the line between free choice and self-enslavement. True resistance lies in choosing when to close our eyes, not in surrendering to the tyranny of exhaustion. Why do we fear sleep as they feared it 5 millennia ago? Because sleep reveals our vulnerability, our bodies still, our thoughts unguarded, our defenses down. In dreams, we may face truths we've buried, yearnings we've denied, or traumas unresolved. Ancient priests spoke of Duat's demons. Our modern demons wear the guise of work emails at midnight, or the glare of screens that promise distraction but deliver disquiet. In both eras, there is a dread that sleep will undo us, that in closing our eyes, we relinquish control. Yet it is in that very letting go that restoration occurs. Neurons reconfigure, memories cement, emotions process. By fearing sleep, we fear the metamorphosis that makes us whole. Tahar's final awakening reminds us that rest is not weakness, nor is wakefulness the sole measure of worth. Instead, human flourishing depends on honoring the cycle of action and repose, of striving and surrender, of engagement and retreat. When we protect the right to rest, we affirm our shared humanity, trusting that in our moments of darkness, we are not abandoned, but held by a deeper rhythm that sustains body, mind, and spirit alike. May these reflections guide us to a new paradigm, one where sleep is no longer a casualty of progress, but a cornerstone of a life truly lived.